Good evening. This is Mae Brussell, and it's KAZU FM in Pacific Grove, California. We put on the card here to have there's a tape recording that we put on last week to take responsibility for the broadcast. The card operation isn't working here, so I will repeat what I said before. The station KAZU is not responsible for any of the material that I put on the air. That is Mae Brussell's responsibility, and I stand by the things that I've said and take that totally 100%. There is no one responsible for the things that I say. Briefly, continuing with the idea of recuperating what happened a year ago tonight, because the year goes so quickly. November the 15th, 1981, I was on the air. This is program 519, just a year ago. And I was talking about E. Howard Hunt being on the airplane that I was on coming up from L.A. He had a top-secret meeting, top-level meeting of the CIA out at Pebble Beach that week. Ronald Reagan's Congress, Jimmy Carter's Congress, was covering up Jonestown. There was an inquiry to begin. The Jonestown inquiry was canceled by the House of Representatives in 1981, November 5th, 1981. The House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on International Operations canceled their hearings on Jonestown. If we would get into those thoroughly, we could prevent future things like that taking place, but obviously the ifs are more than the facts, and these Jonestowns will take place, and this was not investigated and involved the CIA. I talked some more on the Medfly connections, that it would uproot Jerry Brown, and that was the beginning of the smearing of Jerry Brown, so that he could not successfully become senator, and Pete Wilson from San Diego would represent California in Congress. That's what Ronald Reagan wanted. He said, don't send anybody but Pete Wilson, and so now he has Pete Wilson. I mentioned that Ronald Reagan would have to declare some kind of a national war or a Reichstag emergency to get himself into control of the country, that I was waiting for some kind of internal operation to take place, and in a few minutes, a little while, I'm going to talk about the murder up in Oroville, California, of Joe Hoover, and the possible chance to try to get Charles Manson out of jail, and this could have been another kind of continuation of the Tylenol Reichstag operation to get more police and surveillance, identical to the Manson family and the SLA terrorism that took place before. This had the seeds of that kind of operation, but might have been nipped in the bud by the necessary murder of Joe Hoover, breaking the story before the accident or the murder took place of maybe primary witnesses in the escape of Charles Manson out of Vacaville. A murder, I should say there were many. He had inflammable material in the attic of the chapel that he had access to and could have started a fire, as they had in the Mississippi jail, or an incident that took place in New Mexico that was never solved. I was talking about that kind of operation that Ronald Reagan is good at, and with Mr. Meese and Mr. Jenner and the California team in the White House, they would be able to pull that. Of course, a lot has happened in the past year, and he's got more important things to take care of, but I still think they had this option in the bud that was nipped in the bud this past week, and we'll go into that in detail. I referred to General MacArthur in the book The American Caesar, written by William Manchester, and that Colonel Charles Willoughby, the head of the United States intelligence through the whole war in the South Pacific, was actually Karl Wiedenbach, a German, a Teutonic, who was running our operation in the Pacific as Fritz Kramer, the German. The I.G. Farben family was running our winding up the war and bringing the war criminals to this country, releasing them from prison, and making a protege of Henry Kissinger and later Alexander Haig, and dominating foreign policy long after the war was over. We had Fritz Kramer, a German, taking care of the European division, and there was Karl Wiedenbach, who changed his name, who was taking care of the Pacific and actually closing in on the American Constitution as we know it and our liberties, and taking hold of our government agencies even at that time. I was talking about those things just a year ago. Now, I'll go back to a lot more on DeLorean in the next few weeks. Next week is the 20th anniversary since the murder of John Kennedy, so we won't update too much about DeLorean except a few comments. But I did want to talk about some very important deaths that took place this week, and some stories, update a few stories that are primary, and I do want to share them with you right now. That war memorial for the Vietnamese veterans was very impressive. I saw and watched very closely the controversy of that particular design and how they tried to change it, and the artist who won by a fair competition kept it as it was. And the reading off the names for a continuous roll call was very effective in the church, saluting the veterans and reading continuously for 3 or 4 days the name of every person engraved into that marble. It was a very impressive document. Standing in front of that dedication was a Vietnam veteran by the name Glenn Sinclair, and he was yelling at the officials from the VA that were there, and he got up and spoke, and he said, "I have 5 children ranging in age from 1 to 12. All were born with birth defects that he attributed to herbicide. Our people over there did this to us. I want to know what to tell my kids when they get married. Can they have kids? I want to know what to tell my wife. We don't trust you." And he accused the VA, rightly so, of covering up for a long, long time the information on Agent Orange, and then they were forced to say, well, maybe in the next 3 or 4 years we'll find a link. It was a very beautiful design. I would like to improve on the design, although I'm not an architectural student. I drew my own design of a memorial to the Vietnam War. Maybe if it works and I get a contract, I'll be asked to design some more. What I would do is take the original design that she has there, that V with the marble on it, and the name of the Vietnam veterans. And I would have 5 or 6 other pieces of marble spreading out so it would look like a sunshine, like a ray of sun over that field of grass. And on one of those spokes, I would list, instead of the men who died, every government contractor who made $1 million or more off the Vietnam War and made maybe 10 million more off of the Central American War, and maybe of the Middle East War increased at tenfold or 100%. Put names like General Dynamics and what they had in 1954 and what they had at the end of the Vietnam War, or Litton Industry, or Hughes Aircraft, or Boeing, and take all the multinational corporations, Bell Helicopter, and put the figures there of what these contractors had and identify them by name. Who made the cement, who made the tiger cages, who got the contracts, like Brown and Ruett may build the tiger cages or send over the cement. And Lady Bird Johnson was a large stockholder, or is, in Brown and Root. Put the companies that made money off of the war and let the American people who died there see who made there. I think that's fair, because some are dead and others are still making. And then I would have a list of the generals in charge, the CIA people and the chief of staff, who was promoted and which military people, etched in marble, made the herbicide, the Dow Chemical. That would be under contracts. We should remember for all times those people that carried on that war, like Henry Kissinger, and you might even in marble on that long piece, put what he did with the bombings in Cambodia and Laos, and have one branch going out of the people who ran the war, and besides those that made profit. And then another spoke of this sun, you see on the grass is the beautiful piece of lawn, and then the spokes come out. I would put a piece of marble and put all the suicides. I understand that more people commit suicide since the war than were killed in battle over Vietnam. So I think we should etch in marble every Vietnam veteran and person who was over in the Southeast Asia War who commit suicide, and put it on that spoke, and then have a list of everybody who went to prison, who served in Vietnam, who came home needing heroin, cocaine, and hashish, was doped out of their heads, became drug addicted, had to rob and steal, and did murders, went crazy. Last week there were several murders of Vietnam veterans who went berserk. One who put on his battlefield clothes and relived a battle and went crazy, and one driving through windows and killing themselves and having others going to prison. There were several in the news last week. So let's have the prisoners on one of the spokes. And then those that went to mental hospitals, that's another one. I'd put another piece of marble there and etch every person who served in Vietnam or didn't go to Vietnam, resisted the war, and was put in a prison or mental hospital, who was given LSD, a la Timothy Leary and the CIA. It was handed out, who went crazy. Everyone who has a mental history dating back to that period, whether they fought or stayed home, and was given the MK Ultra treatment, they should be etched in marble. And then everybody who is sick or whose child has a birth defect, those people, the cleft palates, the club feet, the spina bifida, the diarrhea, the children, there's a whole lot of them that are suffering. And I think the diseases caused by that war and the chemicals, the names of the chemicals and the chemical companies, because that's a little different than the generals. We have the Dow Chemical and the corporations, but maybe etch in marble what the effect of their actual chemicals do to people. And then I think you should etch in marble the news media people that carried the war, whether it's Mr. Cronkite or Dan Rather or CBS or NBC or Daniel Shore, the people who sold us the war with our evening news and dinner, and then when it was all over, they called it a fiasco. The news media, the press conferences, who conducted the stories at home, knowing the bombings were going on over in Cambodia and lying to us. Let's see who tells the story of Vietnam and glorifies that event. I think it's very effective to see the list of people who died there, but I just did a little sculpture and thought I'd share it with you because there's a little more needed. Those who died is not the whole story of Vietnam. The profits, the corporations, the medicine, the mental sicknesses, the genetic defects, the horrors, the basket cases. Do you know how many basket cases there are? I was once told by a nurse up in Wyoming, people like Johnny Get Your Gun without arms and legs that are secreted away. And now they've tried suicide, various ways, biting their tongue, holding their breath. You know the basket cases that came home? This has never been investigated. I think we'd go into that. Then following the Vietnam Memorial, or simultaneously, there was the change of governments in the Soviet Union, and Mr. Brezhnev passed away. I stayed up till 3 this morning watching the funeral. It was fascinating to watch, and it's very somber. It was a good experience for me. A little tired today, but there was a change of guard there. And finally, Ronald Reagan met his match in the new succession of power, Mr. Andropov. Can you imagine him standing up eyeball to eyeball with Ronald Reagan? I mean, the imagery is so fantastic because one has been groomed with the lollipops, the balloons, holding his hand out of the helicopter, the ho, 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 I'm so happy, but I won't answer your questions. Where's my card, you know? And a man that has been nothing but a front for General Electric, for the Screen Actors Guild, for Right Wing, for the great gung-ho. He wouldn't fight in a war, but he'll sell you the war, sell you the defense contractors, the cost overruns. Now he's president of the United States, and he has to deal Mr. Big Mouth, who wanted war within 2 days of his inauguration. I mean, he didn't accept his presidency gracefully. It was a big brahoo, the entire staff. They were going to meet the Soviet Union head on, and Mr. Brezhnev kept them out of World War III. There were many times the last 2 years where the Reagan administration would have gone gung-ho and wanted it. He kept them out and us out of World War III. But now we have the head of the KGB, and he's the president of the Soviet Union. And don't take that lightly. If I can get on the air and talk to you about Robert Vesco and the Nugan Bank and Mr. Alfred Bloomingdale and the kinky sex of the White House gang and more, and you think of all the habits of the dope dealing and the discussions. There's an article this week about the Nugan Bank in Australia. Here's our Vice President Bush over there at the funeral, who's linked to heroin and cocaine dealing and assassinations in America and in Washington, D.C., and banks collapsing and hidden funds, you know, scrounging around for money. We keep hearing how bad the economy is in the Soviet Union, but we have a can of worms linked to the crime syndicate, to Murder Incorporated, and Ronald Reagan's career was an on-camera event, and now he has to meet a man who knows everything, the eyes and ears of the world. Those Russian candidates aren't very photogenic. They're somewhat even almost ugly to American standards, but they're just like granite. You see their faces. In the Soviet Union, they had a 5-minute silence at the funeral for every single person in the Soviet Union. I don't think America could stay still for 5 minutes. The young people did it for John Lennon, but that's it. I mean, they haven't stood still since, and they never will again. But here is a situation where Ronald Reagan has met a man who knows everything. And one of the interesting comments, one of the first things he said after this funeral and after the death, and he has Mr. Andropov to meet, he made a statement, well, we will get along, we'll try to get along. He said it takes two to tango, and he's willing to try it. Well, he'll do plenty of dancing. There's a lot of tango going on. President Reagan says it takes two to tango. Believe me, he'll tango. And simultaneously with the death of Brezhnev, Mr. Walesa's out, but he's a different Walesa than went in. As he said in the paper, in my future conduct, I will be courageous but also prudent. What he didn't say is that the $22 billion that went from the CIA and the Infobel and the CIO and the Roberta Calvi money and the Vatican money has dried up. He can't do anything without that CIA Vatican money, and the Vatican has to come up with $1.2 billion of notes it promised on Panamanian fronts. So Walesa is a much more humble person. They can afford to let him out the same day that there's a new administration in the Soviet Union, as if the first one wasn't tough enough, because they know what Walesa is, they know where he got his money from, and he will be not quite as aggressive. You need a lot of millions to carry on the kind of activity he did for 2 years. And when the fund dries up, you see changes in their demeanor, and Mr. Lech Walesa is going to tone down, you better believe. And the Soviet Union holds all the trump cards. Why do they hold them? Because Marina Oswald came from the Soviet Union, and from a Tsar's family, and Lee Harvey Oswald was in Navy intelligence. And they know who Lee Harvey Oswald saw in the Soviet embassy in Moscow, and Mr. McVicker and Snyder and Priscilla Johnson, and they know who Mr. Zeiger, the radio factory that worked with Oswald, they know who sent him from Argentina. This new administration with the head of the KGB knows everything about what we've done in this country for 20 years. So I think you're going to see things tone down, because I've always said that the world is run by bullets and blackmail. And certainly the KGB will have the goods on everything that has happened to our administration for the past 20 years, going back to John Kennedy, if not before. Now, another death that was not quite cataclysmic, but very interesting in terms of her influence over her husband, was Mrs. Begin. Aliz Begin died, and the obituary of the paper, in the newspaper, talking about her, Begin's wife dies in Jerusalem. He rushes home, and it tells the story of how he met her. It's in the biography of Begin. To the outsider, it's unclear how far her influence extends, but it is known that her husband consulted her on his every move. They met when they were too young to get married. She had a twin sister, and he decided which one he wanted to marry. But then the article on her death said that the Arnold family was in Drowicz, I can't pronounce that right, the Polish city, Drohovicz, 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 and they were working as leaders in Poland for the right-wing Betar Zionist youth movement. And when they were married May 29th, that's my birthday and John Kennedy's and a lot of others, wearing their brown shirt Betar uniform. So that's time to translate for you what the right-wing movement was of the Begins and what the brown shirt uniform was. And I got some articles from New York from listeners to World Watch, and one of the best that I've referred to just briefly came out of the Village Voice. This was published, Mr. Coburn did this August the 10th, 1982. It was on the background of Begin, where he came from, and this is important because of the massacres and the deaths that took place recently in Lebanon, to understand Mr. Begin and the American government perfectly. This article from the Village Voice says the polls show support for Israel has mounted during the media news story of the Beirut bombings. The Israelis methodically destroyed West Beirut without undue commotion anywhere apparent in the United States, similar to Nazi bombings of Coventry, 500, but Beirut surpassed those 500 more. No opposing force, just bombing. Now, in 1948, December the 4th, in the New York Times, Albert Einstein and Hannah Arendt and others wrote an article, a letter to the editor in the New York Times, 1948. To the editor, among the most disturbing political phenomena of our time is the emergence of the newly created state of Israel of the Freedom Party, the Tanat Harut, T-N-U-A-T-H-A-H-E-R-U-T. This party is closely akin and in organization and methods and political philosophy and social appeal to Nazi and fascist parties. It was formed out of membership and following the IRGUN, Zvi Lumi, ZVAI, in other words, Leumi. It's a terrorist, right-wing, chauvinist organization in Palestine. The current head of it is Menachem Begin. This is 1948, the leader of that party, and he gives the impression for American support that it's calculated for the Israeli elections. He wants to cement ties with a conservative Zionist element in the United States, which he certainly did. Before irreparable damage is done, Einstein said, by way of financial contributions in Begin's behalf and the creation of Palestine, study the fact that a large segment of America supports fascist elements in Israel. The American public must be informed to the record and the objectives of Mr. Begin and his movement. And then the article goes on, the public avowals of Begin's party are no guide to its actual character. And he gives an example, a shocking example of how they're attacking the villages, the current terrorist activity, how it goes back, the massacres, to his early training. And Albert Einstein was warning that the early training of Menachem Begin goes to the brown shirts, to Mussolini's operation in Italy, and he worked with Mussolini and the brown shirts. He was one of the most dangerous men, and the people working with him approved of what he was doing in Germany and in Italy during the forming of the fascist parties. Einstein, according to Mr. Coburn, the Village Voice, or any well-informed person, could study the financial director of the revisionist movement. That was Begin's group, Wolfgang von Wiesel, W-E-I-S-E-L, a good friend of Begin's, who in June 12, 1936, said that he personally was a supporter of fascism. He rejoiced at the victory of fascist Italy and Abyssinia as a triumph of the white races against the black. The revisionists were the most military-minded, and they carried on with the IRGUN. They formed the IRGUN. They trained in Poland at Zakopane, Z-A-K-O-P-A-N-E, by the anti-Semitic Polish army, taught Begin the anti-Semitic army in Poland, and that's where he met his wife and chose between one of two twin sisters. He taught them how to fight and trained the revisionists and told the Jews of Poland, that was Begin's role as a young man, don't resist fascism in Poland. Don't resist it. And he appeased them and told them nothing to worry about. Then he skips when the Nazis come into Poland, full swing. He escapes from Warsaw and ends up in Palestine. He spends a little time in the Soviet Union in a prison camp, and because they were probably on to his murderous ways and his training with Mussolini in the brown shirts in Italy. They wore a brown shirt. This is the group that he had that's described in the Village Voice. They had brown shirt uniforms. They had naval training in Civita Vecchia, V-E-C-C-H-I-A, from 1934 to 1937. It was set up by Mussolini. In 1936, the revisionist cadets, known as the Bataram, were reviewed by Il Duce himself in March of 1936. They described the review of Il Duce and the approval of him. The revisionist leader, Vladimir Jabotinsky, J-A-B-O-T-I-N-S-K-Y, deliberately stressed it had not been necessary to have the school in Mussolini's Italy, but they made it as a matter of choice. They wanted to work in Mussolini's Italy. They praised the Italians for going after the blacks in Ethiopia. They were given permission, training for terrorism on how to bomb and so forth in Poland by the anti-Semitic government. That's where he learned his terrorism, so that future Nazis, I suppose, could take Palestine away from the British and call it Israel. And that is the origin of the power of Mr. Begin and how he can do the things that he is doing now. He went back to Israel for the funeral of his wife. I think the funeral was today. They're both married in their brown shirts, but he will come back and see Ronald Reagan. He has asked for several $1 billion, not in loans, in gifts this week. The American government is to give him. He has offered that country a fascist base that he can have. They can have to militarily to go against the Soviet Union. Israel will be a military base, and that's all it was ever meant to be. Also, an article from the LA Times recently, Begin offers the battlefield data to the United States. Missile destroying invention, secret report included. So he has weapons that are so valuable, and maybe you saw some of them on television during the battle, the missiles and so forth. He will give these secret weapons to the United States or sell them for the money that is we're going to give him. Begin is an extension of the brown shirts of the fascist Hitler Nazi group. He will get everything he wants, and Israel becomes, as I say, a military base. Even the Spotlight, which is, well, I shouldn't say even, the anti-Semitic far-right newspaper, which is opposed, say, to the so-called liberal Village Voice, has an article, Terrorist Life for Menachem Begin, and they tell about how Menachem Begin was used to kill British soldiers. At the same time, Nazi Germany was killing British soldiers, how the establishment press is not interested in the paradox, how Begin defended his actions and bombed the King David Hotel July 22nd, 1946, where 97 nurses and soldiers and British and Arab civilian employees were killed and hundreds maimed. And this goes into how Begin, the Spotlight has the story. Begin deserted the British Army in 1944 and joined the IRGUN, which was anti-British, and worked with them and was collaborating with Nazi Germans from 1940 to 44, killing British soldiers and working with the Germans in Palestine and setting up and receiving his license to exterminate Arabs in the future who got in the way of the power structure. The non-Christian Muslims, Begin was allowed to wipe them up, to go into the villages, and Begin has had the approval for his massacres for a long time. Another article from the People's World has a list of statistics. Israel arms flow to fascism. And it tells about money going down to Guatemala, to the dictator down in Guatemala, money to El Salvador, to the Honduras, to Chile, to Argentina, Bolivia, and Haiti, that they export $1 billion a year to fascist countries down in Central and South America. Israel loaned El Salvador $21 million from its U.S. aid allocation at Ronald Reagan's administration request. See, Begin will come and say, I want say $2 billion. I have the article at home I didn't bring in. I want $2 billion. Ronald Reagan will give him the $2 billion. Then Begin will give it down to El Salvador. That way the CIA is not funding El Salvador. They have so little money after that expensive war in Lebanon, and yet they send money overseas to Africa, South Africa, Guatemala, wiping out the Indian villages and working in all of these fascist countries. Israel is pouring money into Central America. Begin went to Los Angeles this week to ask money of the Jewish community to give to Israel. The Jewish community may just as well write a check to the president of El Salvador and Guatemala and the CIA in Nicaragua. Write your check to them, because that's where it goes. And don't have any delusions. If you're going to do this thing, do it right. That's the truth. That's where it goes. Now, that war in the Middle East, there's just 2 short articles in 1 minute before we take a break and continue with the second half of this broadcast. An article from the Washington Post, this was March 17th, the war in Iraq is costing $1 billion monthly. They have to cut back their economic plans because 18 months of guns and butter in Iraq has affected the economy a little bit. $1 billion a month Iraq spends to fight Iran. And another article, Iraq won't buy 12,000 cars that are defective. From Ottawa, Canada, Iraq said they rejected a shipment of 12,000 Canadian-built Chevrolet Malibus because they're defective. The Iraq government gave $100 million to General Motors because they give the cars to the bereaved families of the Iraqi war dead. You think these are natives out there fighting, and they're buying cars from General Motors, and they said the cars they got didn't work. They were faulty. The transmissions didn't work, and they wanted different cars, so they're going to transfer the order. But the bereaved families who lose a member into the Iraq-Iranian war get a General Motors car, and they stopped the order until they were fixed up. So they were buying $100 million worth of cars for the bereaved members and spending $1 billion in that just short time period over there. War is business. That's why I say I want to design the war memorial of who gets the business, General Motors or whatever. Now we're going to take a 1-minute break and then continue with this broadcast. Now, this is the second half of the program. I'm about 3 minutes over here, but we'll continue. This is broadcast number 571. It's November 18th, 1982. I'll do more on DeLorean in a couple of weeks. There's just so much on him, and it's a little nauseating to read it, but it's interesting. It's not really nauseating. One comment, the London Observer, November the 7th, 1982, the House of Commons will inquire into DeLorean's Lotus Car Company. He had a deal that he called Lotus Car in London, and it was actually a Panamanian front that has about 12 to $20 million in a Swiss bank that has nothing to do with the cars. Now, the Lotus car design is an Italian company, as I mentioned last week, so that the House of Commons is investigating John DeLorean, and so is the Security Exchange Commission, and he's in trouble with taxes and records, and the books were altered. And even though his wife has ordered a new wardrobe for the trial, a very expensive wardrobe, and cut her hair to look like somebody very austere and not so much fun. Again, in this country, it's all image, but watch the stories break on DeLorean. We'll update them in a short time. One quick article and then a few other items I want to linger on at greater length. The Washington Post had an article last week. The United States preserves the Hitler-era papers. Germany wants, according to an agreement in 1980, all the archive records of their families and families going back to the year 200 years ago, the wife's ancestries, the applications for SS officers. They have information in Washington. The documentation center in Germany was cleared out and brought to the United States. There are 10.7 million Nazi Party membership cards in the United States archives, and Germany wants them now. And Ronald Reagan says, I want to copy them. Now, if the United States ever combined with Germany in a Gestapo operation, we would both know who's who and what's what, combined with the microfilmed archives in the Mormon Church in Salt Lake City that have all of us back to the year 600. The Reagan administration intends to have one set of the whole collection. There are 10.7 million Nazi Party membership cards, 660,000 SS Special Police files. That was Himmler's Gestapo. 666,000 files. 400,000 of the SA, the stormtroopers, in addition to the SS. 1.5 million pieces of German correspondence. 2.5 million German citizenship claims and reports. They're in the U.S. National Archives. In 1980, the agreement was to transfer all of this back to the government in Germany, where they would go back again to the history of their SS. They have character references, photographs, meticulously detailed, of the family tree of 300,000 stormtroopers and their wives. The SS officers if they wanted to be married, had to submit applications. Then they traced the wives' ancestry 200 years for the pure German race. Now, where are these children of those people that are already documented? These are, as I say, 400,000 SA stormtroopers and 660,000 SS Gestapo. The bulk of these are in thick-walled concrete chambers in the United States. An agreement was made to transfer them to West Germany. Ronald Reagan is saying, because we might deport some more Germans in this country, they're considering another 210 cases. They want to go over these papers, and Bonn, Germany, is claiming that we're stalling. Also, Hitler's Mercedes is going back to Germany. The car that carried Adolf Hitler triumphantly through the streets of Germany is now going back. It was bought by a man in Phoenix, Arizona, and he says, forget the man who owned it. They are real works of art, the finest thing to come out of Germany. And I remember calling Drew Pearson when Hitler's yacht was sold in Florida and said, you find who bought and sold the that yacht, and you'll find out who had a part in killing John Kennedy. Now, this past week, Otto von Bolschwing, the fellow that I said was connected to Helene von Damm, Ronald Reagan's appointment secretary for cabinet positions and U.S. Marshals, Otto von Bolschwing became somewhat of a hero. The wire services carried stories, the UPI and newspapers. Nazi war criminal was really an ally, and it tells how Otto von Bolschwing worked for the United States Army Intelligence and how he was working to help the United States government, that he wasn't the Nazi people said he was, that he was working with a group in Tyrol. The Tyrol Underground Movement material assisted the armed forces in the United States at the Fern Pass in Western Austria, and that he helped the United States. This is the theory of this article coming out, that Otto Albrecht von Bolschwing worked as a member of the Tyrol Underground, helping the U.S. Army. Well, he helped people get out, but everything he did for the Krupps or for the Nazis before and after was 100% Nazi. So how do we know who he helped get out as a movement? He was working with the SS and the CIA. It wasn't the CIA, and then it was the OSS and Hitler's stormtroopers, the SS. So how would we know that who he got out through this Tyrol Underground movement? It may be some more Nazis that he got out under the title that they were heroes. And now he is being proclaimed in the news this past week as having aided the United States forces. If you aided the United States Army, and the United States Army hired Otto Skorzeny and Fritz Kramer and Mengeles or Bormann to do their jobs, what's the difference if he aided the United States? See, there's no delineation between a Nazi and the United States government. If a Nazi aided the United States, then he's okay. That's his clearance. Well, I think they're trying to clear his name because there was an article in the Washington Times. That's that new paper that took over the Star when they went broke. It's run by Reverend Moon. There's a section in there last month. It said, Reagan's Pearl Mesta, Helene von Damm, the White House personnel director, longs to be the ambassador to native Austria. And it tells about what we've talked about many times, that she wants to go to Vienna, and she's longing to go there. And it's about how she carries on the Pearl Mesta of the Reagan administration and wants to return to Austria. Now, if she's linked to Otto von Bolschwing and the Reinhard Gehlen Nazi network, and I've been sending letters in Washington and tapes, you can't send somebody back to Austria. But if you can say that her boss and friend or co-worker and member of a corporation that she translated for, Otto von Bolschwing, aided the United States Army, then that automatically clears her. Well, if he was so great in the United States Army, I just want to share a few things about von Bolschwing quickly. These come dated May 27, 1981, the deportation papers of Otto von Bolschwing. He lost his citizenship. If he was such a great assistant, how come he signed papers to agree to give up his American citizenship? He should have said, well, wait, I helped you guys. He didn't do that. He gave it up. These were hearings from the Eastern District of California, United States District Court on Otto von Bolschwing. I, the Deputy Director of the Official of Special Investigations Criminal Division, United States Department of Justice, have access to records. I'm reading this, USA against Otto von Bolschwing. I have access to records and information on the naturalization of Otto von Bolschwing and his activities to and prior to the war, prior to it and during World War II. The Berlin Document Center is a repository of captured German documents, which we also have in this country. Those are the ones I'm talking about. I have examined these documents from the Berlin Document Center and other repositories of German documents, the United States Attorney said. And the defendant had the following involvement in the SS, that's the Gestapo, Hitler's SS. The defendant was a member of the SS on April 1940. He joined the rank of second lieutenant. He was promoted in the SS. As of January 1941, he was an agent, special employee of the SD, that is the special department in charge of Jewish affairs. He was an agent and official of the Jewish office from at least 1937 to 1939, and even after it goes into. The defendant participated in planning in the Special Division program. He thought of the idea of the persecution and forced emigration of Jews from areas under the control of Nazi government of Germany. This is in Holland and also in Romania in particular. The defendant advocated and devised proposals which include a complete exclusion of Jews from the economy of Germany, the use of physical intimidation, the use of anti-Jewish propaganda. He provided the SD, in particular to Adolf Eichmann, who was the official in the office, and the Jewish organization, the forced emigration of Jews. The defendant formally became an officer in that special department and held ranks in the office and in Romania in 1940 and 1941, and worked with the Iron Guard. The Iron Guard, according to the United States government, was a violent, fascist, anti-Semitic movement in Romania which murdered, persecuted Jews or any non-ethnic Romanians during that period. 1940 to 41, the Iron Guard staged rebellions in Romania and had pogroms against the Jewish community, and other people were brutally murdered, tortured by the Iron Guard. The defendant, in his position as head of the SD for Romania, encouraged and aided the Iron Guard as the head, and was doing this up till January of 41, and assisted with pogroms, and then helped the Iron Guard escape into this country. And those are some of the new people that Mr. Loftus was talking about in the newspaper, the Washington Post, and I referred to the article a few weeks ago. And this goes on. The defendant had membership in these various Romanian organizations, and they have asked, the United States government asked to take away the citizenship of Otto Albrecht von Bolschwing, because he came to this country and he didn't know a thing about this. He said he signed these papers. Now, after he came to this country, you can let bygones be bygones, but then he met with the most ferocious anti-Semitic hierarchy, such as the people in the Bay Area, and working with Helene von Damm and Thomas Franzioli, Franzioli, a banker, and the Cabot family from Boston, and Mr. Emanuel Senakis, Ftenakis, a relative of Aristotle Onassis. He was vice president of Fairchild, the president of ITT, and worked with Alfred Driscoll from Warner Lambert, etc., etc. Now, on May 27, 1981, the United States government went to von Bolschwing. He admitted his membership in the Nazi Party. I'm reading from these documents. In the SS, in the Special Division. He admitted that. He gave up his certificate for citizenship. Within 20 days, he must voluntarily surrender his certificate of naturalization. The United States of America agrees to forbear from initiating deportation. Alfred von Bolschwing signed this. He agreed that, as the defendant, that he no longer, as of December 22nd, 1981, he is no longer a duly naturalized citizen of the United States. He is not entitled to any of the rights in the United States. His citizenship is null and void. The clerk orders him to turn over his naturalization number 809-4737 in the name of Otto Albrecht Alfred von Bolschwing, and his citizenship was canceled December 22nd, 1981. So Helene von Damm, get to Vienna if you have to, but we'll haunt you all the way there. Now I want to discuss, getting on to another subject, not far from that, the murder up in Oroville, California, little known in news outside of this state, not very much coming out outside of this state. A man named Joe Hoover died. He was murdered September the 30th, and the person who murdered him, the persons were arrested on November the 6th. It took all of October and 6 days in November. I'm going to briefly run down the chronology of what happened in Oroville, California, and the personalities involved and my conclusions, and share this with you for the remaining 15 minutes. And if you have a pencil, write these dates down. Otherwise, you can write to me for them. June 1982, Charles Manson in Vacaville Prison had been under the tightest security in isolation and was allowed to, at that date, June 82, go out of isolation into the medium security prison. In July 82, 1 month after Charles Manson was in medium security, Perry Red Warthen, who's been charged with murdering Joe Hoover, makes his first of 4 visits to Charles Manson, and he brings back from Manson autographed pictures of Manson for his Nazi members in Oroville, California. September the 8th, 1982, they take a camping trip. Mr. Warthen, he has a 10-year-old son, a 14-year-old Nazi, a 17-year-old Nazi group that he's Nazi youth, and they go to a 40-acre retreat where they do hunting and rifle practice and practice shooting. September the 11th and 12th, there were flyers in the lockers of 3 schools up in Oroville. 200 flyers were put there in Oroville High School, Las Plumas High School, and Central School. There was a dial-a-message telephone number that belonged to Mr. Warthen, Perry Red Warthen, and he had his own home phone number on there, and there were messages on how to hang black people from trees and the IQ quiz test on how ugly blacks are, and I won't even put on the air the things that he had. September the 11th, the lockers were filled with the flyers. On September 26th, Joe Hoover, who was to be murdered 4 days later, he's 17 years old, goes to the Oroville Police Department. Now, what he said, we don't know, of course. The cover story is that he told the Oroville police that for $5 he put flyers into the boxes. But he didn't have to tell that to the police, because if they wanted it, they knew that Warthen had lived in Oroville for 4 years. He celebrated the pizza parlor, the Heil Hitler, the anniversary of Hitler's birthday. He was a known Nazi to all the law people up there. So I believe that Joe Hoover was telling the police something else, because when he left there, he said, if they know I was here, I'm afraid of my life, I'll be killed. 2 days later, he tells Chris Jones, who's 14 years old, that he had been at the police department. And September the 30th, Rafe Barker, who's 17, and Chris Jones, who's 14, and Perry Warthen, 41 years old, the Nazi leader, he belongs to a group of 100 Nazis up in Oroville, took Joe Hoover out to a road outside of Oroville, left him by the road, and shot him with 8 bullets to his head, the .22 bullets. October the 5th, Joe Hoover's parents reported him missing. 5 days later, the police don't look to Warthen. These guys hang around town, the four of them, all the time, and hang around the house where Warthen, the Nazi leader, lives. October the 5th, the police department isn't looking for anybody, even though earlier this Joe Hoover had went there and said, my life is in danger for being here. October the 13th, the body of Hoover was located. October the 21st and 22nd, the black families had rallies. No suspect was brought in. No one was arrested. October 29th, Charles Manson, the news explained, had a attempted prison escape. He was put again into solitary confinement. He had been out since June of 82, met Warthen 4 times, and now he was busted and he was put in isolation. Manson had access to the prison chapel. That's his job, cleaning the chapels to him at Vacaville, okay? He's not in isolation. He had the screw door to a trap upstairs had been removed, the screws. He had screwdrivers. He had 100 feet of nylon rope. The door was ajar with cord, special cord. There were 3 prisoners inside the chapel with Manson. He came out. There were tape recorders upstairs. There were 4 bags of marijuana in a chapel. Manson had sharp objects filed down. He had inflammable liquids up there, enough to set the prison, I suppose, on fire. Other unnamed white substance. He had everything he needed. And then to top it off, they had to story a book about air balloons, like he's going to fly out. He can burn the place down. He doesn't have to fly out. So in October 29th, Manson is in solitary, and the media announced a few days later that Manson was busted on escape attempt. And then one leak to the day Perry Red Warthen was arrested after Manson was locked up. Now, the question was, did Joe Hoover go and tell the police that they were going to spring Manson and put him on that 40-acre farm donated by Nazis for Warthen to use for 3 years? Manson had to have special equipment that a provocateur in the prison gave to him. He never could get all this stuff. That prison is not a luxury prison. Even being on the maximum security or the medium security, you're still searched. Your conversations are bugged. There aren't phone conversations. When Warthen goes to see Manson, they had pictures of each other, and Warthen's wearing a sweatshirt that looks like he's breaking open the prison bars with an SS on it. Now, who is Warthen, this guy that's up there visiting old Manson? I mean, we know Manson's record from way back. Perry Red Warthen was not the usual kind of person. He was identifiable in a little town by Oroville. Everybody knew him. He moved there in 1978. He set up the Dial a Nazi message with racial slurs. He lived on $499 a month, Social Security. He didn't work. He stayed home and had, as I say, a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, 17-year-old with him. Kids that had dropped out of school. There's marijuana. There were pictures of Adolf Hitler, Nazi salutes, Nazi literature. And as I say, he openly celebrated Hitler's birthday. Everybody in town knew him. Now, his past court records would be available when you go to visit Manson in prison, particularly with this white Aryan Brotherhood that Reagan says we're going to bust the drug connections. The past of Warthen would be identifiable. As a youth, teenager, he burned a home down to the ground. He was charged with many arsons. He was put in Napa State Hospital as a dangerous arsonist. When he was there, he got the urge to kill somebody, so he killed Robert Yarak, Y-A-R-A-K, another patient. And he got 2 12-year-old boys to sit on Yarak's back while he put a pillow over his head or sheet and smothered him. They tried for a bigger guy, but he got away. He was too big, so they said, let's go for this younger one. So he chose his victim. He smothered him because he said he had an urge to kill someone. So they decided he was dangerous, a psychopathic delinquent. They sent him to a Atascadero. In 1963, when he was 21 years old, he was at the Stockton court. In 1966, he was ruled sane by the psychiatrist and released. So he's been sending these hate messages, having the printing done that goes into the lockers up there, this vicious scene, and sending out hate messages for 4 years up at Oroville in a little town where people easily would identify him, when not only when the literature came out with his phone number, but he's visiting Manson up in the prison. Now, Joe Hoover was murdered. The first accounts were that he went to the police and told them that he was paid $5 to stuff the leaflets into the locker. Now, why would he go there? The leaflets already had Warthen's phone number on them. And if he thinks his life is in danger, why would he have to tell the police, my life is in danger because I earned $5? He's living around Warthen. His best friends live with them and go in and out of the house. Did he tell them that they were planning the escape of Charles Manson? Is that what he knew? Because the story that he went to tell about the leaflets doesn't hold. But if he tells them about the camp they were using, that Manson would use, that something different. Because according to news accounts this last week, there's a 40-acre camp owned by Nazis given to Warthen. It's a Nazi retreat. Warthen takes young men with him to explore the 40 acres. They were donated, he said, to his Nazi group for 3 years. They do hiking, camping, target practicing. The camp is located in Siskiyou County, Siskiou County. It's for private military maneuvers and rifles loaded with wax bullets near Eureka, Yreka. Joe Hoover went camping there with Warthen. They were anxious to recruit him as a Nazi youth, and Warthen talked, according to the kids, more about Manson than he did about Adolf Hitler. He had pictures of Manson. He had messages of Manson. He said, this is our camp for future survivalism when the race war gets going, and he wanted a commune like Manson had. There are 100 Nazis in Oroville area that worked with Warthen, so if Manson were allowed to escape, they had plenty of places to house Manson if Warthen let him out, and if they gave him the accoutrements. They had the places. And it's similar to the old SLA scenario where Thera Wheeler walked out of Vacaville. Remember, the Symbionese Liberation Army was born in Vacaville prison, where Warthen now is meeting with Charles Manson, the same place. And when Donald DeFreeze escaped from Soledad, and Thera Wheeler escaped, in quotes, from Vacaville, they both went up to the Bay Area and met with the very people who were writing and visiting him in prison, and then went on to kidnap Patty Hearst. So here is Warthen and his Nazi cohorts visiting Manson. Manson's up in the attic of the Vacaville chapel, if you can visualize such a scene. And Warthen's telling his boys, according to this one article in the Chronicle, Warthen had big plans to go to those acres. Manson had given to him. One story says that Charles Manson gave him that, so that White Aryan Brotherhood network could be linked. They had plans Rafe Barker kept in his footlocker at home of the hills, the lookout tower plans, the plans to build on it and convert it. And Joe Hoover's father, the father of the boy that was murdered, said Joe was leery about this gang. Well, maybe Joe wasn't leery. Maybe Joe was afraid. Maybe he knew that they were going to help spring Manson. They had pictures of Manson, letters autographed from Manson, and here is a situation, Warthen, a known killer, and he threatened after he shot Joe Hoover in the head, he told the boys, if you say anything, I'm going to murder you. So how many other people has he murdered that didn't speak up? You see, he has all this acreage to use and takes them up camping for their survivalism. Now, Joe Hoover went to the police in Oroville, and he was very nervous. He's killed 4 days later, and the police don't find him. So was the plan to lock Manson up again? Did Joe Hoover break it? His father says he was anxious about the group, and there were all the accoutrements, as I say, for Charles Manson to spring something if they wanted to. Now, Charles Manson is no ordinary person either. I mean, with this guy, Perry Warthen, visiting him, Manson was convicted for murdering Sheridan Tate and 6 in her home, for killing the musician Gary Hillman, for murdering Donald Shorty Shea, S-H-E-A, the tightest security around him until the month his security's over, in walks Warthen, the murderer, okay? from the medium security. One of the first visitors to meet him at medium security was this kooky Warthen. If you see the two of them together, they're just outrageous. Now, Warthen talked to Manson, as I say. He had the pictures of him. He had the acreage. Could they pull this and use this property? I imagine they could. The way the sheriffs covered up the whole Oroville story and the national and international press, I'm sure that if you could get a burnout at Santa Fe prison in New Mexico, or the killings in Mississippi, the black prisoners there, the white guy who does this little feat, you could pull another thing at Vacaville and spring these guys. As a matter of fact, the very person that set up the Santa Fe that worked with him was Raymond Pruquinier, who was in charge of the prison system out here in California, and Manson family and all the famous prisoners that went there. But Manson was the most famous person in Vacaville, probably. So after being released from his isolation, can you visit and have your picture taken with Warthen, and the security doesn't check this guy out with his records? See, he didn't come from New York or Pennsylvania or somewhere. This is a United States, California product, right, out of Stockton and Tuscadero and Napa. So it wasn't hard to find his record, okay? So the point is that the land was there. There are 100 people that belong to the organization. They could be there. The mentality was there. They both want race wars. They both hate viciously black. They're both violent people. They meet together and they have the funding and the means. Now, as soon as Manson was busted, they didn't explain what the three prisoners were doing with Manson. The first thing the news media said was Manson will be not be charged for escape attempt, even though he has the rope. Where did he get the telephone cord? Where did he get 100 feet of nylon rope, the files, the sharpened weapons? What was he doing? What is the white chemical substance they haven't identified? What was the inflammable substance that Manson had in the chapel attic? The nails, screws were removed. Can you see this motley crowd? And the guard comes in and says, "Oh, boys, come on." So Manson goes to his cell, and the other three who are with him, their cells are clean. You can't charge them for a speck of LSD or marijuana. Everything is Manson's. They have to be like Louis Tackwood. They have to be agent provocateurs because their names aren't in the news. The guys that were with them, they're not identifiable. It will fade into a non-news story. And the people in town in Oroville had some interviews and felt that Joe Hoover was a hero for endangering his life to come forward to the police, and they think that he was telling them how he made his little $5 to hand out those pamphlets. But that wasn't the point. What he feared for his life, if he really feared for his life, he wouldn't earn $5 on it and then go tell the police what he did. If he took 100,000, he may have guilt, or 10,000 that could be traced or whatever. But for $5 of worth in Social Security money, he's going to tell him his life is in danger. I think he went camping with them. He knew the land. He knew the visits to Manson. He knew that Manson was sending them autographed pictures. There was the means of getting Manson out and the property. And then what we would get was what Ronald Reagan was good at as governor. Let's go for the SLA. Let's go for the Manson family. Let's have that counterterrorism. Because then you can break into farms. You can bust people. You can look for him. You can begin the no-knocks again and searches, all for the excuse of Manson. When they finally subdue the Tylenol killer, they could switch to the Manson. So I do believe that Joe Hoover was shot. He was scared, and it did blow a plan, and now Warthen is locked up. The two boys are locked up, and Manson is back confined, and the White Aryan Brotherhood and the, I call it the Reagan Reichstag operation, will have to find another modus operandi. Well, this time is up now. It goes fast for me. I don't know about you. This is Mae Brussell, and this is KAZU-FM in Pacific Grove, California.